The bipolar system became a thing of the past, and today we are closer to a global catastrophe than ever, watching not only as the United Nations Charter is violated everywhere, but as its value and mandatory compliance are called into question. Instead, a group of countries, mostly Western, offers us a certain order based on rules they invent themselves, and then pass these so-called rules off as universal. The post-war world order has been tested many times. Once, it seemed the greatest danger was the clash of irreconcilable ideologies during the Cold War. Yet years passed, the bipolar system became a thing of the past, and today we are closer to a global catastrophe than ever, watching not only as the United Nations Charter is violated everywhere, but as its value and mandatory compliance are called into question. Instead, a group of countries, mostly Western, offers us a certain order based on rules they invent themselves, and then pass these so-called rules off as universal. Today, the disregard for the United Nations Charter, that cornerstone document, has reached its peak. In their quest to maintain global dominance, Western elites have lost all restraint in using brute force to advance their political and economic interests. They continue to hunt for resources and influence in their former colonies, primarily in Africa, and wage open struggle against sovereign nations that do not suit them, and are expanding NATO-centric alliances into new areas in Asia which directly threaten to undermine collective security there. Through controlled organizations and media, they divert the international community's attention from the real root causes of conflicts, creating double standards that confuse those who strive to responsibly uphold the United Nations Charter. The era of cooperation in Europe brought prosperity, part of which was the reunification of Germany. However, short-sighted politicians in Europe decided to be more cunning. They decided that cooperation was not their method, that it was better to use blackmail and pressure, that they needed to seize lands in the East again, this time under the guise of North Atlantic Treaty Organization and European Union expansion. These imperial projects are moving east without asking the peoples of the countries they are seizing. They rely on bribing elites and color revolutions. But today, the European elite has decided to drop the mask and bet on overt armed force. They are actively involving themselves in the crisis in Ukraine, including through unprecedented arms supplies. As we have already reported at one of these Security Council meetings, Germany does not shy away from fueling the conflict in Gaza with weapons, including new technologies. On April 22nd, the German defense minister decided to make his state's aggressive plans public. Key documents defining the strategic direction of the German armed forces were published, from which it follows that this country intends to become the primary military power in Europe and take responsibility for its security. That is what is written in this document. The goal of an unprecedented buildup of armed forces and weaponry is being proclaimed. Moreover, Germany, together with France, is establishing a high-level nuclear steering group, announcing participation in a doctrinal dialogue and strategic cooperation with France on the necessary combination of conventional and missile weapons and French nuclear capabilities. End of quote. Germany is beginning to shift its military presence to the east, sending a contingent to Lithuania. The goals and actions announced by Germany contradict the 1990 Treaty on the Final Settlement with respect to Germany, which is the foundation of that country's unification, which imposes very specific restrictions on Germany's armed forces, as well as a ban on possessing nuclear weapons. The same treaty states that only peace should emanate from the territory of Germany. Let us ask ourselves, will the remilitarization of Germany and a policy of confrontation bring Europe prosperity comparable to what this region achieved in the era of cooperation with the Soviet Union and Russia from the 70s to the 2000s? In our view, the answer is obvious, and it is expressed not only in indicators of dynamic development. Mr. Chairman, other countries subject to Article 107 of the United Nations Charter are also remilitarizing. For instance, Japan is developing its armed forces and arms supplies, openly discussing amendments to its constitution, which impose restrictions in this area following the Second World War. The policy of remilitarization undermines the United Nations-centered international system. Countries defeated in the Second World War are seeking plausible pretexts to rewrite its results, and no one should be deceived by their rhetoric. This is a very dangerous trend that deserves the attention of the entire international community. Mr. President, across the globe, the situation teeters on the brink of war and peace. Our eyes turn with alarm to the Middle East and to the bellicose rhetoric regarding Cuba. We are convinced that this path leads nowhere. We must help each other avoid a global crisis and restore the United Nations' role as an honest broker. However, to begin with, as in the past, we must reaffirm the consensus on the basic parameters of international cooperation.
Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, told the Security Council that the world has come closer to global catastrophe than at any point since the founding of the UN. He said there was a time when the greatest danger appeared to be the confrontation of irreconcilable ideologies during the Cold War. But that era passed. What replaced it, according to Nebenzia, is something he described as far more destabilizing. He accused a group of countries, mainly Western ones, of offering the world an order based on rules that they themselves invent and present as universal. He said that in the pursuit of maintaining their dominant positions, Western elites have lost all restraint in using crude, forceful methods to advance their political and economic interests. That language, delivered inside the Security Council chamber, frames the current international crisis not as a failure of the system, but as a hijacking of it. Nebenzia argued that disregard for the UN Charter has reached its peak. He said Western countries continue to pursue resources and influence, expanding NATO-centric alliances into new areas in Asia, directly threatening the undermining of collective security. He accused Western-controlled organizations and media of diverting attention from the real root causes of conflicts and generating double standards. The argument positions Russia as a defender of the original post-war framework, the Charter itself, against what Nebenzia describes as a parallel system of invented rules designed to serve Western interests. Whether that framing is credible or self-serving depends on who is listening. But inside the Security Council, it is the argument Russia is now making on the record.